Let me switch up my video as well so that we have minimum bandwidth.
Great. Okay, I think we're live now. Hi, this is Congressman John Delaney. Thanks for tuning in for our Facebook Live discussion on artificial intelligence and all things that flow from there. We're very blessed today to be joined by two leading experts in the field who are nice enough to join us and lend their expertise about this topic that is very important to all of us. One of them, as you can see, is live here with me, Dr. Saria, and we're going to go by first names here. So Suchi. My apologies. Oh, and Sebastian is back. You can probably see over my shoulder that Sebastian is with us, and he's dialing in from Palo Alto in his position at Stanford, and Suchi's at Johns Hopkins. So we've got two great representations from really singular institutions who have as much kind of academic and intellectual heft on this topic as you could possibly want to have. And so hopefully it'll be a meaningful conversation. It would probably be a much more meaningful conversation if I wasn't part of it, if we just let it up to these two. But I'll do my best not to get in the way of the intellectual horsepower that we're fortunate to have with us here today. So we're going to start with introductions. Suchi, if you would mind giving the audience kind of just a brief background of your history with this topic and just something about you in general.
Sure. Let's see. So I first started working in this field as an undergraduate. Second year in undergrad, I started working in robotics. And then I got recruited to Stanford to do my PhD. And I did my PhD there in machine learning and artificial intelligence with Professor Daphne Kohler and Professor Sebastian Front, who was actually leading the lab at the time. Then came to Hopkins as a professor of computer science. And my work is at the intersection of machine learning and AI and its applications to healthcare. And in particular, what I think about is as more and more data are getting collected in healthcare, from when you go to hospitals, go to routine visits, through wearables, phones, social media, how does this give us a deeper, richer insight into our daily lives and into our daily health and wellness? And how can we use this data to target decisions, your everyday well-being better? And I'll give some examples as we proceed through the discussion today.
Well, thank you. And Sebastian, would you mind giving the audience just a brief overview, recognizing you've had at least one, if not many, many more amazing students across your career, but maybe give us a little bit more detail there?
Well, Congressman, thanks very much, and thanks for organizing this. It's great to bring the nation's attention to the topic of AI. My name is Sebastian Front. My most distinguished property is I was the thesis advisor of Suchi, who is on the phone call. I've also worked for many years in AI, led the Stanford AI Lab for many years as a professor at Stanford, previous Carnegie Mellon, worked in self-driving car, won the DARPA Challenge, built Google X, the Google self-driving car team, Google Glass, did work on cancer detection medicine, built Udacity and Online Education University, and also worked in AI for flying cars using a company called Kitty Hawk.
Great. Well, that's a terrific introduction. So let's kind of get into it. So I have kind of a very threshold question for each of you, and you can chime in as you see fit. But as an entrepreneur by background before I came to Congress, I'm a big believer in the power of innovation. I think if you look back across time, innovation has always improved the life of human beings materially. There's been some setbacks associated with innovations, but in general, its disruptive effects have been nothing but positive. And I expect that to continue with artificial intelligence and machine learning. I'm also just curious as what term you all prefer, because I tend to use them interchangeably. But what is your kind of macro view as to how this technology will play out across, say, the next several decades in terms of its positives and negatives on our citizens and the citizens of the world? Kind of a broad question there.
Yeah, so I think there were two different questions there you raised, John. One was sort of the use of machine learning and AI in particular, and then, how it's going to play out. So let me step back. I feel like people, what is machine learning? What is AI? Maybe we should kind of address that very briefly. So the history of the field is sort of, researchers in computer science and psychology, and back starting from 1960s, and our fascination with can we build computers that behave intelligently? And what this means is, can we behave computers that basically can either mimic human intelligence or do things like planning and moving, much like the way humans do. And what that did along the way is, there were many different approaches people took to trying to build intelligence. In other words, the ability to see an image and understand what's in the image, the ability to hear signals and understand what is being said, the ability to be able to drive on a road, for example. And what this means is using cameras to be able to see what signals are being sent to you, understanding from that where is there a human in the road, where are the red lights, where are the signals, from that being able to reason to figure out where to move. So this is really building technology to give computers the ability to understand the world around them and act, to sort of behave intelligently.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the sort of, there are numerous, as our ability to build more autonomous or more capable, systems that can more intelligently parse large amounts of data and make sense of them, increases, we will be able to position them to behave, I think, collaborate or coexist with humans in fields where we can do joint decision making.
Mm-hmm.
So one very simple example is healthcare. I think in healthcare, right now it's over $3 trillion of spending in healthcare. About a quarter to a third of it, people often talk about as unnecessary or avoidable waste.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it is attributable to settings in which you could have avoided taking unnecessary measurements. Like one example area where I've done a lot of work is, for example, in sepsis, which is the 10th leading cause of death. We've shown that, so sepsis results from an infection. What we've shown is it's possible to identify sepsis early. And if you can identify it early and get the right treatments early, it's possible to get someone whom you would have let them deteriorate, leading to organ failure and death. In other words, many more days in the hospital, etc.
Yeah. Bad outcome for them, bad outcome for the system.
Exactly. And so that's a very simple example of a very simple case where the data exists.
Right.
We could use computers to use this kind of data to learn and identify individuals at risk earlier.
Right.
And be able to then augment our capability right now, at present, provide doctors with the capability of quickly parsing through tons of data and providing this information. They can use this information to then act. It makes them more productive because they can act faster.
And more precise in their diagnosis.
And more precise, and they're able to take better care of their patients. So it's a win-win for all. And so this is just one example. I think there are numerous such examples in manufacturing where effectively, again, I think being able to take otherwise, high complexity tasks, simplifying the information in order to provide sort of bits of knowledge that people can act off of very quickly is an area I think that we will see a lot of progress.
Sebastian? Are you with us? We might have lost our connection with Sebastian.
Oh, he's back.
We had a connection problem. Can you repeat, please?
So we were just kind of talking about in general some of the basics of artificial intelligence and machine learning, and we talked about how it can affect healthcare and empower physicians. And what we started by talking about was kind of in general how you think about artificial intelligence and machine learning playing out across the next several decades in terms of some of the macro effects it'll have on our society.
Yeah. So to me, machine learning is to the human brain what the steam engine was to the human muscle. If you go back a few hundred years, in Europe where I'm from, 90+% of the people used to work in agriculture and plow fields. Then we invented machines that amplified our forces so that one farmer moved from feeding about 4 people to feeding about 200 people. As a result, today we find most of us doing office work. 75% of Americans work in offices. And we do a lot of repetitive work, I would say mindless work very often, over and over again. And this is not just low-wage work. It goes all the way to the highest ranks. When you look over the shoulder of a lawyer, you find that they mostly do extremely repetitive things like document discovery. When you look over the shoulders of a physician, they do a lot of repetitive things. And to just give one point, we recently did a study at Stanford to try to see if you could train AI to parallel what the best human dermatologists could do in finding skin cancer. And we found that an iPhone can do as good as a human doctor in identifying melanomas and carcinomas. Now
and that's based on current technologies.
Right. Based on current technology. Yeah. The technology is interesting. Technology is technology where a computer looks at millions of images or millions of games when it comes to playing Go or chess, and is able to pick up patterns that are even hard to pick up for people. And in these extremely repetitive tasks, computers eventually parallel or even outperform humans' abilities to make decisions. It's a very narrow task, not very broad task. There's no danger of being enslaved. But in these narrow domains, AI can make us much stronger. What this means for me, for people, is that we can, at some point, we'll say goodbye to repetitive work. Those jobs where we do the same thing day in, day out, will be under threat, and they will be replaced with jobs where we can be much more creative.
Right. So, and so that historically, we've seen this trend where innovation has largely created more jobs than it's disrupted. And the quality of the jobs, not entirely, but directionally, has been better, right? More rewarding,
right.
Less burdensome. So how do you think about that as it relates to this trend? Because obviously one of the big concerns, there's really two concerns that people have associated with AI. One we touched on, which is the Hollywood effect, right? Which is the Terminator and all those kind of things that are going to take us over. We'll talk about that in a second. But the other real effect is this future of work concept, which is how will these incredibly powerful tools, which as Sebastian just said, can really make repetitive tasks not really need human interaction quite as much anymore. How do you think about that in terms of jobs of the future?
Well, I think we have to address this right now and talk about it, because there will be winners and losers.
Right.
The people who are able to ride the wave and stay educated and stay in front of it will benefit dramatically from it. The people who are stationary, who think a single educational lifetime is sufficient, they might find themselves threatened. And just give you one example. For the last 12 years or so, I worked on a self-driving car. I ran the Google and built the Google team, the Waymo team that builds self-driving cars. And there is at least 1.5 million taxi jobs that are immediately threatened by this. There's an equal number of truck drivers who might end up losing their jobs. And we as a society should use AI to further ourselves and invent new jobs that are more interesting than, in my opinion, being a cab driver.
Right. Suchi, what do you
So
think?
I think just building on Sebastian's example here, right? So one thing that's happened is, as we have autonomous cars and it becomes cheaper and cheaper to travel, more people are willing to travel using cars,
right.
Which means we need now more human operators that are managing these autonomous cars as opposed to kind of driving from point A to point B. So it's exactly building on your point, John, that effectively the quality, if you will, directionally of the job becoming more cognitive.
Right.
So they're becoming, and so as a result, now instead of driving cars, you're playing more of a managerial role of understanding the mechanics of maintaining cars and the financials of managing and changing and replacing. And now we need a new economy of individuals who know how to repair these cars. And effectively, us building our education system around sustaining that workforce that can effectively build and manage these cars. And so that's all new work that didn't exist. That
Well, the productivity that should come from this should allow us to not only create opportunities for people to do better jobs, provided they get the training, and that's a very important point, but it also should free up resources in society for us to create compensation structures for jobs that are desperately needed that we don't really have any ways of paying people now. I mean, if you think about the mentorship opportunities in this country, the apprenticeship opportunities in this country, a third of the population is caregivers. That number is going to go to 50%. you could imagine a society where, things that are badly needed in society right now will actually start getting compensated for if we can get all that productivity.
Right.
So that's also the one way. I mean, a lot of people say to me, well, it's going to get rid of all the jobs, so we need to go to universal basic income right away.
Right.
And I'm like, well, that seems to me to be we lost Sebastian here. We'll try to get him back. That seems to me to be something that we're a long way off from, because there's already a huge number of jobs in society right now. I think you're back with us, Sebastian. Sorry about that.
I just came back.
Yeah, so I was just saying there's a huge number of jobs that in society right now that people don't get paid for, and there's a huge number that are needed that we haven't been able to figure out in a highly productive society how to pay for them yet. But you could see opportunities for that in the arts and culture and all kinds of things that are desperately needed.
Take an example, education.
Yeah.
Put one teacher together with 30 kids.
Yeah.
In my opinion, is a travesty. I think one teacher should be with 2 or 3 kids.
Right.
And there's so much opportunity to do better in these places. My friend Jeff Bezos has this example that says when you go to a medical doctor, there's a waiting room.
Right.
If a doctor is truly a service provider, why would you, as the person who pays for the service, have to wait for the doctor?
Right. No, that's right. So I think we just have to, but that's one of the reasons we founded the AI Caucus, which is there's a lot of fear and concerns. I mean, part of it is on the employment side, because people see the jobs that are disrupted. As Sebastian said, 1.5 million taxi drivers, 1.5 million truck drivers, and they're like, oh my gosh, that's 3 million jobs. Driving may be the largest job in society. When you add it all up, who knows? They're going to all go away, and we don't have the imagination to see the jobs that will get created.
Right.
And so we really have to start thinking differently about how these things can benefit society and how the productivity advancements associated with that can be redeployed in ways that improve society and in the process create all kinds of jobs.
So actually, John, on that note, a very nice sort of simple analogy is like the introduction of Airbnb, right? If you think about it, what really happened there? It was very simple. The innovation there was connectivity, global connectivity, and it allowed individuals who previously had homes that were unoccupied to make it available. Right. It created jobs as individuals. It created an income source for many households through this alternative way of hosting people. It provided individuals who were traveling a new way to experience the world by going to homes that they otherwise wouldn't have access to. And so all net, it was a huge benefit, and just from this very simple
It takes capital and makes it higher returning in some ways, right? So all the capital stock invested in those homes was used for a very limited return purpose, which was to live in, and not all the time.
Right.
And now it's basically being used more efficiently. So you can start seeing how the resources in this world, which are precious, as we all know, some of these things could actually really optimize resource utilization.
Right.
So, I mean, again, you two are experts at this, so this conversation takes us. You can see how this conversation could take us in a very positive way. But then the question obviously is what is the role for government here, right? So my approach to the AI Caucus is to start with educating the members of Congress, because I think it would be a mistake to immediately start regulating, right? Because we want the innovation to flow. But I do worry about things around transparency, privacy, and the preparation of the workforce for the demands. And I tend to think of the role of government perhaps intersecting in those areas with this innovation. So we'll start with you, Doctor, with your views on that, and then maybe we'll see what Sebastian has to say.
Sure. So first of all, I think it's very important for the government to not move too speedily in any one given direction without listening to many diverse voices. And I think one of the major challenges in this area and any rapidly progressing area is that it's very easy to let social media and sort of public voices on media like Hollywood drive some of the conversation. Right. So I think this, you bringing in sort of people who are researchers in the field or experts in the field to have this conversation, I think is very important, and listening to as many diverse voices is very useful. I think regarding the specific issues you raised around transparency, security, and education is very key. I think thinking about, 3 key aspects there. One is being able to train the next generation of scientists in order for us to become productive faster and uncover some of these issues faster. So for instance, around security and security, privacy, transparency, we're still, so I'll again go back to my very concrete example, as we can already see the benefits of how we could empower clinicians by using these technologies. And in order for them to be able to coexist with these technologies, right now, our current technologies are built in a way where they either trust it too much or they don't trust it at all, right? And what we really need is more transparent decision making. But just like you would do with a trusted colleague, where you know they tell you something, you're like, why are you saying this to me? Do I believe it? Does it make sense to me or not? When should I trust it? When not to trust it? And you sort of learn how to reason with them.
Right.
And this notion of, as AI systems, we see more practical uses of it in our daily lives, there will be more opportunities for us to coexist and make decisions together. And part of that is going to be able to reason together. And part of that is going to be able to have the technology and systems in place to do that. And for that, we need more innovators. We need the ability to build these sorts of things and to be able to, as startups and companies deploy these technologies, we're becoming better and smarter about learning how to enable transparency and enable collaborative decision making. And so from a government's point of view, I think, to me, what seems interesting is to figure out ways to, you know, encourage funding in these areas, where it's easy and, you know, you're encouraging the right kind of innovation, if you will. So that's one. And then the second is, really, there's an absolute, like, shortage of STEM, you know, students in STEM fields, and figuring out how we create training programs, joint training programs, where we can basically create interdisciplinary programs to, you know, move more students in these intersection areas where they can understand how to translate these in a meaningful way.
That's interesting. Sebastian?
Yeah, so I think the most urgent thing for government right now is to help assist its people in this new age. And as Suchi already pointed out, I think education is one of the key things. I think we're not in a situation anymore where single education is sufficient during a lifetime, but the people have to be able to be mobile and make education a lifelong endeavor. That is a major shift. And if we miss that boat, we're going to have lots of folks left behind.
And already, I think with sort of the emergence of MOOCs, I mean, in the last 5 years, it's been tremendous, right? You know, as, you know, it's true that this is not entirely an unbiased sample of the population, but when we see graduate applications now, almost every applicant has taken at least one or more courses on a MOOC. And these are applicants from, you know, remote parts of the world where previously they would not have had access to this education, but they're sitting at homes, watching courses, learning all about what's possible. And I think that's very exciting.
Well, I remember when I was on the board of Georgetown University before I ran for office. And it was right when I was on the executive committee, we were doing a relationship with one of the MOOCs, and I won't name which one. But it was really interesting because a professor from MIT came and spoke to us, and he said, you know, I think he taught the electrical engineering kind of first-year class at MIT. Enormously popular. You probably maybe know what I'm talking about. Enormously popular class, popular professor. He taught it for 20 years, a couple hundred students in his class. And he told the story, and it was just so kind of empowering to hear it. He said in his first year that he was on the MOOC, more kids took his class by a factor of 3 than his whole history at MIT.
Wow. And
it made me think, you know, and when I think about my own kids, I'm like, what I'd really like is, and this ties into what Sebastian said, what I'd really like is for my youngest, I have 4 daughters, you know, and she's in 5th grade now. I would love for her to spend a little bit of time every week with the single best 5th grade math teacher in the world. And then to then break away from that and get one-on-one interaction. Like, that seems to me to be the model we need for education going forward.
And that's
happening. And I, as a godfather of the MOOC, I guess it's the very, very first one, where we had 160,000 students taking AI at Stanford. What's happened is the company I started, Udacity, now has about 1.7 million students. We have a program called NanoDegree Plus, where students can sign up without admission, and among those who finish this program within half a year to 90% find jobs, and the average salary bump is $34,000. That's data that's been independently verified by an independent assessment entity. And that's working. There's now new career paths that are working. If I had one plea for Washington, D.C., I would get into that train because that's serving our people. It's
Absolutely.
making a stronger nation. And whoever can solve that nut, how to get people educated during their lifetime, will be on the front of innovation.
And one of, I think it's interesting, some of the great institutions in the world, you happen to be associated with two of them, right? Johns Hopkins and Stanford University, these are singular institutions, right? They actually have a unique opportunity to share some of their gifts to many more people because historically it has been, relatively a privileged few who have the ability to actually participate in some of the programming that these kind of institutions have. But I just saw an example in my own district where Johns Hopkins worked with a community college on a cyber security certificate. Mm-hmm. And Hopkins was, thoughtful enough to kind of work with the community college and lend its brand. And the uptake on that program, both in terms of the number of students who take it, it became the largest program in the community college in like 2 years. And 98% of the kids had jobs within 6 months. And, so it just shows that there's an opportunity for some of these, as Sebastian said, to kind of get more people educated, but you can excite more people educated by showing them that it'll have a payoff. And there's actually a pretty interesting role for some great institutions, I think, to play in this.
I think people are hungry. My general impression is people are hungry. Right. They want to learn more. They need more opportunities. Right. And then the question is sort of making it possible.
Right, because it's hard to navigate now.
Right.
Right, so the more we can create a roadmap where we say, okay, these are, right now there's 7 million jobs in this country that aren't filled because the employers can't find jobs with the skills. Right. It's the 7 million help wanted signs, right? The skills gap. Not all of them are technology related, but a lot of them are. And so figuring out a way to tackle that problem so it's actually digestible solutions that people can say, okay, if I do this, then I get this. That'll actually motivate people to actually get the skills. And right now we haven't done, it feels like a bridge too far for so many people.
Right.
That's where private industry is now stepping in, and I think government has not moved very fast.
No, absolutely not.
It's a great opportunity. So companies like Udacity do this here in Silicon Valley. We teach more students, for example, how to build a self-driving car than all universities combined. And our students massively find jobs here in Silicon Valley and beyond. For tuition levels, they're about 5 or 3% of what you pay in a regular community college.
Yeah, no, so there's a lot of innovation there. So, but back to AI. So when I think about AI and how it's going to trend, what is really the limiting factor in some of this great innovation? Is it data? Is it hardware? Is it computing power? I mean, what's really, like, we'll talk about driverless cars, right? Which is, we all know it's not a question of if, but when. What is the limiting factor in making driverless cars, for example, the reality? I know there's the whole litigation, lawsuit issue about how they're programmed, et cetera, but what are some, let's use that as an example, because people are focused on driverless cars.
From the litigation. Most important thing to notice for people is there's two types of AI that people talk about. There's what they call specialized AI, like a program that can read the words the player. And then there's general AI. It's like the AI that enslaves you, the AI that Elon Musk talks about that you should all be scared about.
Yeah.
In terms of general AI, there has been no progress. No progress lately. The systems today are as good as the system 10 years ago. All the progress is in specialized AI. And the key is that you give a computer a pattern that is extremely repetitive, and it can then extract its own rules from those patterns. In that area, the limiting factor has been data and machine power. And it's just now we can accumulate enough data and have enough machine power to solve problems that can be relevant to society.
Got it. So the general AI is the stuff that people are afraid of.
So I kind of disagree with Sebastian.
Well, this is good.
Here. Yeah, I don't think of general AI as basically what enslaves you and specialized AI as what doesn't. I think you should just leave aside the idea of enslavement because it's just very complicated. I think many experts will disagree that there's anything to it.
What are they called? Singularity or something like that?
Right, and I think, if you're interested, Rodney Brooks, who's a roboticist at MIT, has a very beautifully written article where he talks at length about it, and I highly recommend people read it.
And does he kind of debunk it or support it?
He gives very strong facts debunking it.
Got it. Okay.
I think, so to build on the parts of what Sebastian says that I agree with, I think one area where AI has made a lot of progress is if you have effectively large amounts of data, there's recurring structure or repeating patterns, and you want to be able to identify, so for example, cases from controls or A and not B, and there's a recurring structure that's highly associated with A but not associated with B.
Yes.
Very simplistically put, you're effectively constructing computer programs that can automatically search and learn from data what these patterns are, and then use that to behave and do things that humans would take forever to do. Because we don't.
But it's still based on a program.
Right, but these programs are like learning. So a very simple example that I like to give that is very intuitive makes intuitive sense to people is...
Simple examples work well on me.
Simple examples. So like, here's a very simple example. Let's say you wanted to teach a robot how to walk.
Yes.
Okay, that sounds like, so for roboticists, they know it's very, like, it used to be a very hard, because programming all our rules to get the robot to manipulate joints is a lot of work.
Right.
Okay, but let's say you wanted to be able to teach a robot how to walk. So there are three really key ingredients. So first ingredient is you have to construct a goal. Just like in a game, when you're learning how to play a game, you have a goal. Goal is winning. So here in this case, walking, the goal is you want to stay as long as possible, stay up as long as possible without falling.
Right.
Okay, so in mathematics...
Move and be upright.
Exactly. So in mathematics, we can write down that goal.
Yeah.
Okay, using equations. It's not that hard. It can be written. Okay, so that's the first piece. You have
Probably
a goal.
Not by me, but by
but it's doable. So then the second thing you do is you figure out, okay, what are the actions, like small step actions, baby steps that the computer can take. So the baby step actions are, you know, if it has 6 joints, manipulate these joints. So turn this joint to the right, to the left, right? So a move, a robot learning how to move is basically literally it moving one of the joints.
Right.
And so now, so the second step is, so you have a goal. Now it's going to learn how to move. So the move is moving these joints. And then effectively, once it moves, it gets a score. So a score is if it falls, it gets a negative score. If it does well, it gets a positive score. And that's it. Now the robot will learn how to walk by doing the following. It stands there, it moves, it gets a score. If the score is positive, it continues to build in that direction. If the score is negative, it stops.
Right.
Retries a new strategy.
Got it.
And over time, when it does this enough number of times, it's learned how to walk. Very simple
So
example.
the program basically, embedded in the program is this self-teaching.
Exactly. That's an example of using data, because it's collecting tons and tons of data, and from that it's finding recurring structure. And the recurring structure, what are the kinds of...
It hasn't actually imagined how to do it.
Right.
It's basically through massive trial and error, it actually...
Exactly. And so now you might imagine in my case, for instance, when I'm teaching like computers how to spot diseases.
Yes.
I am using massive trial and error data from other doctors.
Right.
Where I have data from thousands of doctors.
Right.
And I've seen them do they've seen over 1 million or 2 million patients.
Right.
And from their trial and error, I can see who are the ones who caught them.
Right.
And who are the ones that missed them.
Right.
And what happened leading up to it.
Got it.
And then that's the structure. That's like the computer trying to do trial and error simulating what the doctors saw, right? So that's one area where basically, we would have a hard time parsing 1 million samples in our head. But computers, with the right mathematical, so all I described was an objective function, a goal, written in math, moves, which means the search space, and being able to now do this idea of like search or gradient descent in mathematical terms in order to be... Now this is very simply put, there are many flavors of this. And if you have little data, you might generalize better. If you have priors from experts, you can build that into your program to intelligently guide the search. You can do lots of things to expedite this, but you get the high-level idea of what it is. There's nothing built in this that's saying, go kill humans or anything like that.
Well, your point is there's millions and millions and millions of steps between you get to that point and where we are now in reality. So Sebastian, how do you think about this question, right? So if you read the papers, you have Mr. Musk, who thinks this is the end of the world in many ways, is very dystopian about this innovation. That's not where I am. I'll be the first to admit it. And then you have others. I don't know who's the best example of saying, who's a super famous person of saying that this is going to be enormously positive. But I'm sure there's someone out there.
Zuckerberg.
Right. So he's
Sebastian.
Sebastian. So you answered the. I was going to ask Sebastian where he falls on the continuum.
there's always been negative people in society that proclaim the end of society.
Yeah.
And,
they've always been wrong.
Us to all go to Mars. And I adore Elon for so many things, but this one you just got plainly wrong, in my opinion. But there is a possibility in the distant future that something bad might happen. I think the much more interesting thing is what we just discussed before, what's going to be the impact on the labor force today and tomorrow. Now that we can find computer programs that are as good as medical doctors in certain areas or as lawyers. And to me, this is a positive thing. I think we're going to free humanity of repetitive work. And that might sound trivial. We've done this before. We freed humanity of most of humanity of repetitive field work. And in that proceed, we became much more creative, became much more literate, became much more healthy and lived longer and lived better. And still, when we look at work today, work is mostly unpleasant, it's mostly repetitive. And I think it's degrading for humans to do repetitive work, to be quite frank. All of us do it, myself included. But we're going to look back and say it's degrading because we are all more creative than this. We can create better things than this.
I love that.
And if repetitive work is left to the machines, then the number of inventions, the amount of innovation will go through the roof because I believe every human being has the potential to be an innovator.
Right. No, I love that framing. And look, I think the facts clearly favor the optimist. Right? First of all, historically, it's always been positive, as Sebastian pointed out. I just look at the trajectory of what's happened during my life. When I was born a little over 50 years ago, 75% of the world was in poverty and 25% of the world was interconnected. And innovation technology has caused the global interconnection rate to go to about 80% and the global poverty rates down to 25%. So just on a macro basis, you've got billions of people that have been lifted out of poverty because we've allowed technology to connect us, more people enter a free market economy, and these innovations improve. So we'll clearly, even the work issue, I mean, we don't know quite how it will resolve itself, but it's hard to imagine that there's not enough wealth. The wealth in society will continue to grow. Democratic institutions and societies will ultimately find ways to make sure a large number of people are taken care of with some dignity. And what that means, I don't know exactly, whether it's creating ways to pay people for things that are, I mean, if every community in this country had fabulous cultural institutions that stimulated young people's minds and had art teachers and music teachers to bring out that creativity, you know, those are huge numbers. I mean, just go down the list. So I tend to be an optimist as well on this stuff. So.
Good. So let's make all of Congress optimists.
Yeah, well, that's the job of this caucus, and the fact that you guys were willing to do this is so grateful.
I want to add that I think it's really realist to me. It's not
totally.
I think
it's
this
the facts.
is it. I mean, I think the majority is definitely singing to in our favor and speaking to what we discussed today.
But we have to keep talking about it, and as we've talked about here, making sure people are equipped to handle the transition. Absolutely. Because if a large number of people aren't equipped to handle the transition and they end up being on the wrong, because right now, in the last 30 years or so, the world has sorted itself out as the winners and losers in globalization. And that sorting could have been more positive if we would have had better policies in place to help people engage when this change was occurring. And it seems to me we're going to have that again. There's going to be more sorting around innovation and your ability to successfully engage with innovation, technology, etc. And so it seems to me our job is to figure out how to make sure more people are on the right side of that ledger.
Absolutely.
So, Sebastian, thank you. I know you can't see us, but we saw you very clearly, and you did a very nice job, and I appreciate all you bring to the world and to this conversation. Suchi, the same thing with you.
Likewise.
Thank you. It's so nice to have you here. And so I enjoyed that very much. I hope you all did. And to my 300,000 followers, it's great to have you. And again, Sebastian, thank you. I look forward to meeting you.
Honor and privilege.
Yes.